How's it going, guys? So we are along with our good friend Steve Cotter. You'll just see him on the other side of the screen there. Steve is in sunny San Diego. I'll be going over to join him in March, hopefully. Me and young Dan McCaffrey, we're going over for the Fitness Business Summit. And it's nice and sunny there. As you can see, Steve's got a nice suntan going on. So, Steve.
Yeah. By Irish standard, it's a tan.
Yes, we're like see-through over here. So Steve is the founder of the IKFF, for any of you guys that don't know, and all-round awesome dude. We had Steve over a couple of years ago teaching in hybrid fitness. Steve, you want to quick introduce yourself there? Yeah.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. Nice to talk to you guys. So I'm based in San Diego. I provide education all around the world via seminars, certification courses, focused a lot around kettlebells. However, my approach is very holistic. It's informed a lot through traditional martial art training. So I'm incorporating a lot of breathing, a lot of body weight mobility, flexibility, also meditation and mindset training. So it's a very kind of, my focus is on health, not sport, but obviously there's a lot of overlap. So, the fitness is a component of the bigger objective, which is health and well-being.
Nice. Awesome. Nice. So Steve, to anyone who doesn't know you, give us a quick background. I know you're obviously saying about your kettlebells, but how did you start? How did you get into the fitness industry?
Well, I just turned 48 a few days ago. So I would say my first formal training in what I would call physical culture was when I was 12 years old, back in 1982. And I became immersed in the Chinese martial arts. Most people know the term Kung Fu, which is sort of a generic term that describes the Chinese martial arts, but there's several hundred different styles with, individual peculiarities. So the arts that I was sort of raised in is called the internal martial arts. So it incorporates the martial, which is the fighting and the self-defense, with sort of the medical or the health side, which includes qigong, breathing exercise, meditation, and also body work like massage and bone setting, and then of course the weapons and all the conditioning. So it's very comprehensive. That was my initial background to physical training. Taught me the importance of hard work and focusing on skill development. And then I sort of entered the professional world. Well, that was also my first profession. So when I was 15, I started teaching on a part-time basis. That became basically my first job. I was teaching martial arts for many years. And then when I was in my late 20s, when I was in 27, I decided I wanted to go in a different direction. And I decided to go to university. I studied sports science, and I got my degree in kinesiology. And then graduating there, I started going into fitness as my profession. So this was about 2001. Right at that time was when kettlebells were really new on the scene. Pavel had just started his program in the US, which is the RKC. That was my first introduction. I saw the attraction of the kettlebell. I saw how it was very complementary to martial arts, in as much as it's very much based on using your whole body, coordinating the body rather than, and again, now we know a lot more in the almost 20 years since then. But at that time, the term functional fitness was still kind of a new term. Yeah. And people were still very much more familiar with bodybuilding, and most of the education in terms of what we call fitness was coming out of muscle magazines, and people were still saying, hey, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the pinnacle of fitness type of thing. And so it was in the early stages of what we now call functional fitness. This is before CrossFit even existed, just to give a little bit of reference. So a lot has changed. Now the average consumer is a lot more educated in terms of, we understand the idea about training movements, not muscles, training maybe for performance rather than just for an aesthetic appeal. And So, the kettlebell really fit well with, and then of course the martial arts has always been functional fitness from the beginning of time. It's all about training the body and maximizing what you have in your skills versus trying to put more and more mass that isn't necessarily intelligent mass. And, so the kettlebell was a perfect tool for me at that time. I immersed in it. Pavel and I connected right away. I basically trained myself for about 1 year just off of Pavel's basic video. I bought a couple kettlebells of 16 and 24. I learned the movements, but I was able to adapt to it very quickly because of the overlap in terms of my understanding about stance and learning how, using the body as a unit. And so by the time I went to my first RKC course in 2003, I had about a year of training plus more than 15 years of martial art training going into that. So I quickly established myself within that program. And anyway, fast forward to more present day, things have evolved a lot. There's a lot more information, a lot of different approaches to the kettlebell. In the early days when I was first involved in kettlebell, there was really no understanding about kettlebell sport, for example, or training for, ultra endurance. It was more about use for power and strength development. And, so I've adapted a lot of different styles, a lot of different influences, whether it's the hard style with Pavel, which has a lot of very positive features, and then learning more about the Russian sort of modern way, which is more based around the sport. And then, now in my age at being 48, I still feel great. I still can move really well, but we understand that we're aging. We're all aging, and every decade, the body's a little bit different than it was previously. And so the 48-year-old me doesn't feel exactly the same as the 28-year-old me. So we have to adapt these changes. And so I have become a lot more interested in not just fitness and performance for sport, which in some respects is a younger man's game. It's not that we can't do it into our twilight. It's just that there's a peak physiological, there's a physiological peak where a man is going to say, reach his point where he's not going to get any bigger or faster or lift heavier. So now it becomes about how do I sustain what I have for longer, and how do I integrate that into my entire life, which to me means, fitness, but it also has to do with energy, vitality, peace of mind. And then there's the other aspects of life, like your family, your relationships, your business, and other things that are important that don't just exist within a gym. And so, my system and how I teach is sort of a blend of different influences. It's really my own style. With IKFF, it's not hard style. It's not kettlebell sport. There's aspects of different that I like, but it also integrates a lot with the mobility. My basic foundation for anything fitness and movement related, it's the body. And so if we're talking about a kettlebell or a dumbbell or a barbell or a sandbag or any tool, a mace, those are extensions of the hand. From my way of looking at it, it's your movement with the body is really the foundation that everything is extended upon. And when we talk about the body, we have to also look at the breath and the relationship between the breathing and the body. So that's sort of an overview of my approach and how I do it. And professionally, I became most closely associated with kettlebell because I was one of the early pioneers that adapted it and kind of brought it around the world. But if you ask me, what's the most important thing, it's not going to be the kettlebell. It's going to be the body itself and the quality of movement. And so I'm not married to any one system. I like good movement, whether it's coming from an animal-based or whether it's coming calisthenic or handheld tools like kettlebell and suspension. And I believe we can't be experts at everything. We can have it all, but not at the same time, as I like to say. So I prefer to just have a few things that are very comprehensive that I immerse myself into, try to develop a high level of understanding before I branch out into, it's not like the flavor of the week and, okay, I did this, I did 10 reps, now I'm ready to move on to the next trend.
Yeah.
And these are time-tested tools, all these handheld tools, whether it's kettlebell or any handheld tool. They've been around for a long time. It's nothing new. It's just that what's old is new, because we kind of come full circle and we went through the bodybuilding thing and we saw the limitations of that. And so my system, I think, has a broad appeal in that it's for everybody. It's not just for the hardcore. It's not just for the gym people or the power lifters or the CrossFit or the bodybuilders. It's for everyone who has a body. And as great as we all love kettlebell, and we it's a big tool that's featured in many fitness programs, not everybody can do kettlebell. Some people, their challenge is to get out of the chair and walk across the room. So have to be able to meet people at the level where they are. And there's certain common factors. Everybody breathes and everybody moves.
Yeah.
So when people say when I talk about my own development, not the teaching, because when you teach, you have to provide what the student needs. But in terms of my own development, I don't really see it as workout or training. It's every day I move. I do some kind of movement. Now, I might move with a kettlebell in my hand. I might move without a kettlebell. It doesn't really matter. It's just that we have to keep moving. That's what we're here to be active. And if we, as the saying goes, if you use it or lose it. So we got to use it. And then it's about finding that balance. And again, the balance is heavily featured in sort of the Eastern philosophies and the Eastern martial arts, kind of even in the logo, you have the kind of the yin and the yang, and so this is important in the fitness too, is because we can't always go driving. I'm going heavy hardcore, and yesterday I did 10, so today I'm going to do 20. There's a point of saturation, and then if we try to force through that, something's got to give, and nature's not going to give, we're going to give. So it's finding that balance between hard and soft, going intense, going light, but always doing something. And so I really focus on the health more than the fitness, because fitness, it's relative to where the person is at and what their goals, because we're all fit, but at any given moment, I might not feel like I'm fit, or you might not feel like you're fit, because it's a comparison. Fit for what? Competition fitness is different than I can get out of bed and go to work and do what I got to do and pick up my kids and, lift the groceries. Two different kinds of fitness. So
you still coach people? Do you still coach?
I don't really do one-on-one right now. My one-on-one, I'm exclusively working with jiu-jitsu fighters, because I'm training a lot in jiu-jitsu now, which is one of the benefits I have of kind of cutting back on my travel, because I do a lot of seminars throughout the year. But, this year I've made definitely a concentrated effort to do more locally. And I'm still going to do seminars, going to be out there with you guys in Belfast, which I'm super excited about. But I'm being more picky and choosing specific events versus, in the previous years, I'm constantly going all around. And so there wasn't as much self-development in terms of my own practice. And, so now I'm working a lot with the jiu-jitsu, and I'm training those guys in the jiu-jitsu and developing some new conditioning programs that are pretty much jiu-jitsu and grappling specific. But
Steve, what do you
aside from that, I'm not doing like personal training or anything like that. Yeah. I do professionally. My work is more in the seminars and, doing events and things like that.
What's your take on UFC? And I know
on the UFC.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely an emerging. I mean, they're athletes. They're definitely athletes. It's high level for what it is. If you ask me honestly, I prefer boxing. Yeah. Generally, like the average boxer compared to the average UFC, I consider a much higher level. Higher level meaning more skillful, not necessarily meaning tougher. A UFC fighter has to be well-rounded in various modalities and various ranges. They need, in modern age versus say 10 years ago, they need to be skillful with their hands, skillful with their feet. They need to be skillful in the clinch and takedown, and they need to be skillful on the ground. So just by the definition of the sport, as the classic saying, jack of all trades, master of none. if you look at, I know, and Conor McGregor is an incredible human being. I know he's a hero to the Irish people. I have nothing but respect for him. But just as the example, as great as he is, we see what happens when he crosses over to boxing. Now, by UFC standards, he's a very high-level boxer. He's one of the very best if you just look at the boxing. But you see that it's not possible that he would have to devote himself for many years just to boxing. And Mayweather pretty much had his way with him. That's my perspective as an objective, not caring who wins, not being a fan. Now, of course, so what I'll say about UFC is it's emerging. I think 10 years from now, it's going to be more refined than what it is now. It's still kind of in the intermediary. 10 years ago, it was still, you go back to the early stages 15 years ago, jiu-jitsu was dominating. The Gracie won the first several. And so the assumption was, ground fighting is the superior martial art. And that was also part of the marketing because the current, UFC's changed ownership 3 times now. But the first was the Gracies were actually behind the UFC, and they wanted to demonstrate the superiority of jiu-jitsu because they wanted to grow the brand and the awareness. And so by beating everybody using jiu-jitsu, it gave that message. A few years later, we saw, well, not necessarily, because now the wrestler, the Greco-Roman guy can come in and throw you on your head, or now the kickboxers coming and knocking people out. And it went through several iterations before it got to what I would say the last 10 years is modern, where these guys can do all. It's not you can't just be a great kickboxer and not know how to defend yourself on the ground. In terms of conditioning, very high level. In terms of mental toughness, very high level. It's a sport in a sense, but it's not a sport because you have to really love to fight. You have to really enjoy fighting to really be successful. And you could be a great athlete, but not necessarily be a great fighter if you don't have that mindset. So these guys are pit bulls in their mindset. And that's something that you're born with. And maybe it has something to do with the upbringing, but it's not something you can train for. That's what I think. So in terms of athleticism, I don't compare it to like NBA, NFL. Like it's a different level because MMA, not UFC, because that's the highest level of MMA, but MMA is probably the only professional sport where someone could have 6 months of training and be a pro athlete. You would never see that in any other sport. They would have to have probably 10 years, so I think that's just because it's still new. But I'm curious to see how it's going to look when you have, UFC where they have the highest level jiu-jitsu, they have professional boxing level punches and professional kickboxer level kicks, and they have high level in every range. Now it's going to be a different story. And I don't really think we've only probably had a handful of fighters in UFC where you could say, okay, this guy is, maybe you can make an argument for someone like McGregor, but even McGregor, objectively, we would say that his ground fighting is probably the weak link for him. He can ground fight. I'm sure he could tap all of us out, no problem. But if he were to go against, say, a jiu-jitsu black belt, he probably would not fare so well just in jiu-jitsu, right? So that's, you had guys like Anderson Silva at his peak was very well-rounded. That could pretty much be. That's more the exception than the rule. But, I think I respect them. I like working with those guys because the one thing is they do not succumb to pain. Their mind is tougher than their body and they can push through. And a lot of athletes in other sports, they do not have the same mental toughness.
It's crazy mindset,
so,
isn't it?
Steve, I want to just bring it back to a point. So obviously your degree in kinesiology and just something you said about your system is focusing on movement. And whatever tool you use, it doesn't really matter. The movement is the key. And I love that you brought up kettlebells and were able to understand movement. So if you were speaking to, a new coach, would you forget about obviously the tools and just speak to him about, if we talk about what Dan John would say, the basic fundamental movements, your push, pull, hinge, squat, low carry, dip, whatever it is, would you tell people to focus on movement patterns rather than, as you say, training the movement pattern rather than doing specific exercises like a bench press, for a big chest? Would you actually train how the body would do that? What's your thought?
Yeah, as an overall, yes, I would back up first and I would say, who is this person and what are they training for? I would want to know that first, because it would be a different answer if someone was training for a sport or an activity, which is specific, versus if someone is just, they don't care. They just coming because they want you to help them feel better, look better, and maybe have more energy. And whether it's kettlebell or running or doing barbell, it doesn't really matter to them. They just want the results. But if it's a guy that says, hey, I want to compete in a kettlebell sport competition in 6 months, now, so it's a little bit different in the approach. But I'll talk about the broader picture, which is just health and well-being, and we're using fitness as a tool to support that. In that case, movement pattern is really what matters more than the tool. And so what I will want to do is identify what's the movement pattern and then ask myself, what tool do I want to use that I think will best teach that? Yeah. Some of that depends on what you have access to. Like if you got a small little place and you just have space for kettlebells and a suspension, that's different than if you have this massive gym with every tool that, because now we have a bigger toy box to choose from. We can have fun. So, everything has to be practical, but in some cases, and also if it's a child, that's going to be different than if it's, say, a mature adult that's been an office worker for 30 years. Someone's 45 years old and they have this office desk and, this desk posture with maybe slumped shoulders and kind of a concave chest and maybe a belly that's a little bit too big. I can't just say to that person, okay, I want you to squat with your body weight, because their body is so far removed from its natural condition because they've been living in the modern world for too long, that in some cases the kettlebell would be better to start them with, because it gives them a prop that they can reference as kind of their center of mass, or actually can give them some counterweight. But if I'm taking a kid who's still flexible and pretty much hasn't screwed his body up yet from 30 years of modern living, that kid, I want to see him squatting just with body weight. I want to see what his squat looks like, and I want to kind of get that perfect. It should already be there, but if it's not, it shouldn't be that far removed, because, that's how I look at it. It's not things we have to learn. We already know how to do this, because a healthy child, and there's sometimes environment and how they learn can have an impact. And sometimes there's certain congenital illnesses or, there could be certain types of genetic reasons why the body is not perfectly balanced the way you would normally expect. But for most people that are healthy, you take a baby, it's going to lift its head. There's a predictable pattern of human development and movement progression. They're going to roll, they're going to lift their head, they're going to learn to push themselves up, then they're going to start crawling, eventually they're going to stand onto their feet, then they're going to start walking, and then they're going to start running and jumping and climbing. So that's a progression, and if you skip one of those, it's going to come out later in life. Yeah. And it also ties into the mental synapses and how we learn. And like, for example, certain kinds of dyslexia, they can trace back to where there was certain maybe neural connections that weren't formed. Sometimes children will go from crawling to walking too quickly, and they don't spend, like maybe the parents, oh, you can walk, and they push them too fast, and it actually can affect their ability to learn, because we can't rush certain natural things. So, like those are human, but if you take that child, you tell him if he drops his toy and he's going to squat down, it's a perfect squat. He's never been coached once in his life, but his body does it. That's the normal body. That's how it's supposed to be. But then you take an adult that's been sitting at a desk and they made a lot of money or and they do a lot of work, but they kind of sacrifice their health. That person probably can't even go to 90 degrees and can't go below. So I would say that adult office worker, has learned a lot of bad habits that they need to unlearn, and they kind of need to remember what their body already knew before. So they're not learning something new. They're actually getting rid of bad habits that they've accumulated to get back to that kind of neutral zero, where now, you know, so I would do that before I start loading them with additional weight. So I look at their body weight, you know, or put a light kettlebell or a light, you know, dumbbell as like a goblet squat to offset, and just see, you know, can they keep their feet flat? You know, are they able to sit back on their hips? Can they get their hips below their knees? Or can they keep their trunk kind of in an upright position, or are they folded? And if they're not doing that, I want to spend time on the mobility before I get too enthusiastic about, okay, let's throw some weight on the bar now. And, you know, that's how because I don't think by adding weight, you're going to fix the mechanics. You're probably just going to exasperate whatever mechanical flaws there are until eventually you have an injury. You know, so that's kind of the first ethic of any trainer, regardless if it's sport, fitness, general. First, do no harm. That's the first ethic. It's not about making someone bigger, stronger, faster, or losing fat. It's about don't hurt them. And then now that you don't hurt them, now we can also progress them in an intelligent fashion. So I think it's experience. I guess to answer your question, there's never one formula that's, if you're coming in at a high level, I don't need to start you at a low level. I should be able to meet you at the level that you're at and bring you from there. But if you're kind of, you know, an office guy, maybe you need to go below zero and kind of regress just to get them to that level playing field where we can, okay, now we can start strength conditioning.
Right. Steve, you've spent a fair bit of time in around Asia. You've traveled there a fair bit. The way you were talking about the deep squat, and I hear, I've read a bit about it, and their movement pattern, probably down to cultural differences, seems to get like a sort of better reputation than Western society. Did you notice that when you were out there?
I do notice that on average, it's quite noticeable. On average, you know, mainly China. I go to Taiwan a lot, but China is sort of the main market, and you could extend that even to, you know, Indonesia and Philippines and Korea and other Asian nations. But, you know, we will see in a class full of 20 people, say the average Chinese student is going to have a much deeper squat. Their feet are more likely going to be facing forward, the toes.
Yeah.
The average, say, European, Western European, Eastern European, Western European, American, Australian are going to probably have a more of an eversion with their feet, and their hips are going to probably get stuck, or they're not going to get as deep. That's the average. Now, of course, with training, that changes everything, because it doesn't really matter the ethnicity. If you're training and practicing, you can develop the skill. But just, I noticed that, and I do think it's cultural. But I would also predict that at the rate of development, a generation from now, we will see that more and more Chinese will look more and more like Westerners, because most of the cultural difference, it's not the ethnicity, it's the culture. In other words, it's the dominant habits of how they're spending their time and what they're eating. And if you look at, you know, China in particular is a new superpower. It's a new economic power. A generation ago, that wasn't the case. So for many generations, China was very poor, very rural. And so if you look at the diet, they're not getting a lot of meat. They're getting simple, you know, a lot of wheat, a lot of rice, a lot of carbohydrate, vegetables. If they have meat, they might get meat on occasion, but it's not going to be a big steak. It's going to be little pieces of meat, because meat is a luxury item in the sense from a food point of view. Like wealthy people can eat steak. Yeah. Simple people eat beans and rice. So, you know, so you have a lot of, in the West, started eating a lot animal protein, larger portions, a lot of calcium in terms of milk and cheeses. And they have an effect to make the bones more dense. So generation over many generations, you have the Westerner is going to have a hip structure that's more dense, which is great for stability, but works the other direction in terms of mobility. And the other thing is the modernization. Also in China, for example, they're only modernizing now. Again, a generation ago, they weren't sitting in chairs in most places. Their toilets were still a hole in the ground. They're not sitting at desks for 8 hours. They're doing manual labor, and you see in Indonesia and places in the rural areas, they're sitting in a full squat and working. There's no back pain. But in the West, we have all these luxuries, and almost everybody's walking around with some form of back pain because we're sitting in these cubicles, the 90 degrees. The body forgets. So that's really what I think. But I think that on the downside, China, because they have money now, they're looking at the West and especially the American lifestyle, and they're like, I want that. I want the big cars. I want McDonald's, and I want Coca-Cola. So they're importing all our shit. They're importing our bad habits. It's not like it's not a one thing or another. There's a lot of factors, but I do notice that. And, another thing, like our ancestors didn't do fitness. When I'm saying our ancestors from 100 years and more, or even less than 100 years, they were farmers and workers. They weren't like working out in the field for 16 hours and I got to get my workout in. They would eat and go to sleep and do it again, but they were working and they were burning calories and working with their hands and working with their back. So what we call fitness and working out, it's actually an antidote to modern living, because in the modern world, we're using our brains a lot, but we're not using our bodies in our daily activities. Now we're on computers. So we have to schedule it in to offset, because if all we did was our office work, we would, we'd be old by the time we're 35 years old in that.
Just as you were saying there, Steve, I remember listening to Donnie Thompson talk about this in terms of the different ethnicities and their sort of feet angles. He was just talking about more Africans are going to have a flatter feet. And then we look at it again in our movement and mobility workshop. We're looking up the chain. So, we're looking at what's going on at the ankle, the knee, the hip. We're not looking for that symptom. We're looking for the cause, maybe poor movement patterns. And just based on what you were saying there before about screening people, would you use any specific things to screen people? Or, because a lot of your stuff there, when we talked about, crawling and rolling, is a bit like Ray Cook and, his FMS system. Is that something you use?
I don't use FMS. I'm familiar with the basic structure. I think it's great for what it is. Like I have a lot of experience. So what I basically use, it's observation. And, my thought process in terms of how I analyze, it's really very much influenced through the sort of the Chinese kind of martial. I would say that the traditional Chinese medicine, they have this concept of the 5 elements. There's also aspects of that in the martial arts in terms of the 5 techniques, but there's all these corollaries. So like, what do we have to observe with? We have our eyes, we can watch, we have our ears, and we have our mouth which work together. So the mouth, you ask questions, the ears, you listen to the answer. Okay, we have the smell, which we don't use so much, but like if you go in the olden days, the old doctors, they would also smell the skin and they would do all kinds of stuff. They would look at the bowel movement and they'd say, oh, does it float? And, oh, it seems really stinky. You're eating too much protein or whatever. We don't really do that. I don't do the smell thing. But and then you have the tactile, you have the touch.
Yeah,
like, and then, but obviously with the modern world, we have to also look at like litigation and what we're legally entitled to do with our license. So that if you're not a therapist, you're not really supposed to do too much touching. If it's in the context of stretching, probably, but it's kind of a fine line. You're not supposed to really be giving massages if you're a personal trainer, right? Yeah. So that's a little bit more limited. When you have someone who's maybe a holistic doctor or a therapist, they have a little bit more. But every trainer at least has the eyes, the ears, and the mouth. So we can gather information. I ask you questions like, do you have any illness, any injuries, family history, high blood pressure, diabetes, right? What's your nutrition like? How much rest are you getting? Are you having a lot of stress? I can get information so get some kind of profile about you as a person. And then from there, I don't need FMS for me because I have experience, but I could see that if you're trying to train a room of, say, 50 trainers, you need to give them the template. The FMS works great. So it's a great program, and it probably has value also for me, but it's just one example of it's the best known example of sort of a built-in assessment protocol. But every protocol has its strengths and weaknesses. We don't want to be limited by one protocol either, because we can't turn off our powers of observation. So now I can bring you through a mobility routine. I can have you, let's say, turn your head, and I can observe if I'm paying attention. It's like, okay, one side is more rigid than the other, or when you walk across the room, you're leaning more to one side, and I can gather information. And then I can do simple tests. Like, I want to see you squat. I want to see you put your hand overhead. It's like, is your arm like that, or is there a big gap, or do you have that? So I want to see you be able to, or even just a plank. I want to see, can you stabilize your body for 20, 30 seconds without moving, so that I have an idea that you have a basic kind of foundation of core stability. So now I can start overloading you, say, with a kettlebell swing or a deadlift, and I feel I can do it safely. So that's kind of how I do it. But there always has to be assessment. We got to get information. And then we can't just be married to, because if I'm looking at this, I'm not looking at you. I need to be looking at you, and I need to be observing what you're doing, and then maybe taking notes or making mental notes, so that I say, okay, this is a limitation, or maybe you're good at everything. Like, yeah, there's no obvious problem, so we can get right to it. So you could probably do that in the first session. A lot of people, though, see, I have the advantage. I work with guys like you. I work with people that know their bodies, that are fit. Most of my courses, they're going to be fitness professionals for the most part. So they have already different degrees of background moving their bodies. So they're coming in at a much higher level. But a lot of what you would call the industry of personal training, it's supported by professionals, which are people that are in, either stressful jobs, whether it's accounting or medicine or legal stuff, or just working in the office or working on computers. So they're not so connected to their body. So you may have to really simplify it, and maybe you got to do things like box squats and simple things like that. So again, I never have this approach like there's one template that everybody should use. I don't believe that Michael Jordan and my grandmother should be doing the same workout, So yeah. There is something to be said for scalability, but it has to be in context. The whole idea about scalability was with circuit training was basically you have one coach and you have maybe 10 or more people, and you're limited in equipment, and they're all at different levels. So how do I take this high-level athlete and my grandmother, and they can work out at the same time doing the same thing, but how can I scale it so this can be challenging to them, but this can be simple enough for her, and everybody can work at their level? But it was never intended to be like, here's one workout that everybody needs to be doing. Yeah. I think it's a misinterpretation. And CrossFit's done an amazing job with how they packaged it and did that. But, even if you look at CrossFit, it's known for the WOD. But if you look at the CrossFit Games, those athletes are not, if they're doing WODs, it's like an extra workout. It's not how they're training. They're using strength and conditioning principles like any strength conditioning program in any college athletic program. So,
yeah, it's getting initially CrossFit sort of, it was like dividing people, wasn't it? Like it was like dividing people. People were saying it was a bad thing. People were saying it was a good thing. I think now, especially over here, people are kind of seeing it as more of a sport, whereas initially, I think
it's proven itself. I mean, it stood the test of time, and it's still here, and it doesn't matter. People can hate and people can criticize, but it's not going away anytime soon. Who knows? 20 years? I don't know, but that probably depends on the leadership and what people do now. But and it's here, and so
people moving.
since it's a thing, let's figure out, and you have a lot of very bright minds and very high level and intelligent coaches that go into CrossFit because they see the opportunity maybe from a business point of view, but they're still doing their own thing. It's not like I'm an attorney and now I do CrossFit and I love it because I get to get rid of the stress. And so now I'm going to open my CrossFit gym and now I'm a CrossFit level 1. Yeah. That happens, but that's not the guy that I want training me, you know? Yeah. So, you know, in fairness, a lot of the negative comes, it's just there's good and bad coaches in every system, but CrossFit is very successful, and there's also a lot of jealousy because you have trainers, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and, you know, they resent that you have this program that is maybe stealing all the attention. Yeah. I don't have that attitude because I see they love to work hard. I don't do CrossFit. I move, you know, but, you know, it's kind of hard to define. What is it exactly?
Yeah,
is it Olympic weightlifting?
Yeah, just on that point, Steve, we actually assessed one of our previous students. So I'm obviously a sports massage therapist and stuff as well, and I use a lot of acupuncture and cupping, and I was able to blend some of the stuff that we do with, you know, FMS, as you say, it's blending these things to find an approach and finding movement patterns. But we assessed one of our students, and he had a massive asymmetry that you could clearly see on his left-hand side. And his sort of training was revolving around bodybuilding. And what I'd said to him was, regardless of whether you were bodybuilding or whether you were doing CrossFit or whether you were doing, you know, GS, your movement and the way that your body is at this moment in time, you're going to get hurt. And the problem is then someone will blame, oh, you know, bodybuilding hurt him or CrossFit hurt that guy. And as you said, you look at someone's structure, their posture, the assessment, you just know that this person needs to learn how to move better. You know, obviously restoring maybe their breathing patterns, to learn them how to, you know, not sort of hyperventilate, all these sort of things. But as you say, a lot of these things get a bad rap when we look at the person, and that person's probably been sitting on his phone, cack's neck, looking at a laptop, and no matter what movement he was going to do, he was probably going to get hurt. And I think that, as you say there, it's just, I'm all for getting people moving. But obviously, we want to look and we want to do it in a smart and efficient way. And I think, as you say, great coaches will spot that. It's the novice guys who just decide to do a certification 1 week, and you know, I think that's where the industry sort of falls down.
When it becomes a sport, you know, you have in certain sports more than others, but you have your specific movement patterns, and you're getting more points for being good at these moves than that. You know, so I think. I don't keep up on it like to the minute, so I could be outdated with this info. But last I was looking, it seemed like CrossFit weighs, at least in the sport of CrossFit Games, they weigh the Olympic lifting more than, you know. So essentially, if you're good at the Olympic lifts, you're going to rate really highly in the game. You know, so as a result, you're going to have dominant movement patterns, and it's going to be sagittal plane. And if you're training for the sport, you're training to win. So you're not necessarily training for health. You're training for athletic glory. And so you're willing to sacrifice your long-term health and overdevelop in certain ranges and maybe ignore other ranges that aren't going to help you win the prize. You know, so that's a different story, but that's like any other sport. And the same is true in, you know, tennis or golf, or when they're using half their body. So a training perspective has to kind of understand that about the athlete, that they're doing these dominant movement patterns, and say, well, what movement patterns are they ignoring? We need to sort of address this so that we can have a more holistic, not necessarily because it's going to help them perform in their sport, but it's going to help them to avoid injury and just stay more well-rounded and healthy outside of their sport.
Yeah, nice one. Steve, so you were talking earlier, you were hitting out at meat eaters a little bit. Just kidding. So you've switched to vegan now, Steve?
Yeah, 3 years, almost 3 years.
How you feeling?
I feel amazing. I feel good all the time. You know, I'm not a political, like I'm 48, so basically the first 45 years of my life, I ate everything. Yeah. You know, I'm definitely not a guy that's going to be hypocritical and say, oh, you're doing this. It's not for everybody. It's for me. I have my reasons, you know what I mean? And some people, they get a little defensive because it's like, I don't care what someone eats, right? Like, to each their own. I believe in general, we want to be conscious as much as possible about the decisions we make. And I do think there's a lot of misunderstanding and miseducation. Some of it's from agenda. Some of it's just ignorance or just cultural, like, oh, I always believe because that's what I was taught when I was a kid, and so it must be true, and I feel good. So you can have good results on almost any type of diet, at least for a period of time. A lot of times it's not because of what you're eating, it's in spite of what you're eating. You're maybe doing many other things right, but, you know, so anyway, I feel great. I don't really have inflammation. I mean, I'm sure if I did a scan, maybe there could be some inflammation, but in general, my inflammatory state, it's much low. I recover really quickly. My energy is great. My body weight is down. Like, you know, my walking around, I'm about, usually I'm at about 72, 73 kilo, where before I came vegan, I was probably around 77 kilo.
Yeah.
You know,
I seen a photo of you the other day. You posted up you're 48 and your abs were popped.
Yeah, but I'm lean. I'm super lean. You know, I'm 48 and I don't take any hormones. I don't take any steroid. I don't take any growth hormone. You know, I just eat. I don't eat any meat. I don't drink milk. I don't eat butter. I don't eat cheese. And what has happened, but when I first did it, it was for what you would call ethical. It was basically for the animals. Like, I don't want to kill the animals anymore. I see they're suffering, especially free range is a kind of a different topic, and there is a big difference in terms of it's a free range versus a factory raised.
Yeah.
You know, but in general, you know, I mean, when you talk about the big factories, it's just crazy because they're like concentration camps, and these animals, they spend their entire existence in these prisons, and they can't move, and they get sick, and they shit and piss all over themselves. So then they got to give them, you know, hormones and stuff to keep the meat so they can sell it. So it's extremely unhealthy. Plus, you're getting all the fear and all the anxiety. Like, that goes somewhere. It goes into the food that you're eating. So a lot of people, they don't make the correlation. There is a saying, you are what you eat. And
you are what you're.
I don't have the scientific, and I'm not really interested because I don't have an agenda. Like, I don't need to prove anything to anybody. I'm just sharing my thought processes. But there is a correlation. You know, we have these diseases, and people are like, oh, he was healthy, and then he came out with cancer. But these things don't happen overnight. And am I saying that eating meat causes colon cancer? No, not necessarily. But, you know, you got to kind of see things through. Like, what happens, you take flesh, can be any flesh, human, dog, cow, okay? It's already dead, so it's already started to decompose before you even eat it. And now you put it in your intestines, which are like pipes. Human intestines are very long. They're more than 9 feet long, okay? So it's dark, and it's moist, and it's warm. Yeah. So if you take a piece of flesh and you put it in a dark, warm, moist place, and you have it sit there for 3 days or more, you know what's going to happen. It's going to start to ferment, and it's going to start turning rancid. You know, so, but the problem becomes compounded when you start mixing it. Now you're going to eat meat, and you're going to eat it with fruit. Well, they digest totally different rates, and they use different enzymes. So the fruit wants to pass, but it can't because the meat's holding it. So the fruit starts to ferment. So when people have like gas, indigestion, bloating, upset stomach, this is not normal. Some people, it's a matter of course. Every meal, they always have it, and they just accept it as, but that's not normal. Like, normal is garbage in, garbage out. The system's like any system, it's a cycle. So we talk about nutrition, you have to also talk about digestion. You're not really talking about nutrition when you just talk about what you're eating, because that's the chemical composition. But what happens after you eat it, what happens with the assimilation and the processing, the digestion, and the elimination, that's the whole, you know, we're not separate from nature. We are a part of nature. and a lot of the habits that we have in the modern world, it's not congruent with natural conditions. Like genetically, we are essentially the same species as we were 10,000 or more years ago, but our lifestyle is drastically different. And so we haven't had the opportunity to really adapt, and we've moved very far away in terms of a lot of our daily customs, like our postures and where we're spending our time and our mental energy and what we're eating. And it's even worse in US, because US, it's basically a corporation. In Europe, the food standard is much higher by and large. I'm not saying in Ireland the food standard is the highest, but I'm saying as a whole, Europe has a higher standard than US, because the whole business of it started here, and the whole industrialization of the food as a industry, it's very corrupted. And that's not how it's supposed to be, because food is it's not a product. It's a fuel that we need so that we can live and function. So for me, the vegan, initially it was on the kind of ethical side, but after making the change, I noticed my body, it changed very quickly. I initially lost a lot of weight. And, my wife and most people wouldn't comment to me just out of being polite or whatever, or they don't want to offend the teacher. But, I was getting feedback that basically I was kind of gaunt, and people were used to seeing me very muscular, which I've always been muscular for my frame. And then I kind of was looking skinny, and I was like, okay, I need to get smarter. And so after about 6 months, then I started paying more attention. Like, I already made the decision to be vegan. It's a principle. I'm not doing it just for health. Initially, I'm doing it because of something that I believe in. But since I'm doing it, I need to learn how to do it healthy. So then I started educating, finding out, how do I get the nutrients I need? What foods do I need to eat? Do I need to supplement? If so, what do I need to supplement? And I kind of have found a much better balance. And like anything, it's a work in progress. We have to continue to upgrade and continue to become more knowledgeable as more. But just food source is that, whether you're vegan or not vegan, one of the first thing is where is the food coming from? So as much as possible, getting a local sourcing for your produce. If you're not growing it yourself, you hope that you can find a farmer. And if there's no farms, then you need a cooperative where once a week they go to the farmer's market and you get a box of food or something. So, so that's kind of, and then you look at whether it's organic or not, and then you look at kind of how the food's combined together. There's a lot of, but to answer your question, it was the best decision I've ever made in terms of, from a health perspective, from an energy perspective, from a peace of mind, a state of mind. And I've also noticed that even my strength hasn't really gone down. My absolute strength, yes, but I would attribute that mainly because my body weight is lighter, and also because I don't train for absolute strength, but in terms of every other aspect, my lean body mass is I'm leaner. Probably my lean body mass is probably more. I'm maybe 4 kilos less, but my strength to weight ratio is still high. And so I don't really believe a lot of the common thoughts. I mean, the earliest people that started eating meat they ate meat because they thought it made them stronger for warfare. Or as hunter-gatherer is like, there's nothing to gather, so now we need to hunt. Yeah. But the hunter-gatherers, they only hunted when there was nothing to gather, because the gathering, it's the path to least resistance. So like if you're living on a Caribbean island, you're going to be eating pineapples and coconuts because they're everywhere. You're not going to be running across the island to chase down a rabbit if you don't need to. But if you're an Eskimo, there's not a lot of berries and fruits around. So you're going to be eating seal and reindeer and whale blubber. And so that's what the hunter-gatherers did. They were nomads, and they would gather, and then there was nothing to gather. They would hunt. But the hunt, it's not like, oh, I'm going to drive down the street and go to a store and buy a package of meat. It's like, I'll see you in like 3 or 4 days, because I got to chase this giraffe for 24 hours, and we got to drag it back. It's a lot of fucking work, excuse my language. And then it's like we have a big party and we have a barbecue and everyone's going to eat meat, but then it's going to be gone and we're probably not going to have meat for 3 months because winter's coming. So we're going to go into cave and we're going to kind of hibernate. You know, then in the springtime, now we're going to gather again. And that just, I try to use my logic. And it's like, because we weren't there and there's all these theories, but I try to use my logic, like what makes sense. I could see that sort of makes sense, that's how we evolved. But in the modern world, it's really corrupted. Most people eat meat because they were fed meat as a child. It's what we grew up on. It's like, and then the beliefs, you need to eat meat to be strong. Well, I can point to, there's more and more vegans that are very strong, myself being one of them. But, this guy, Frank Madrano, is incredible body, his strength to body weight ratio, at least in the upper body, is, you got this guy, Patrick, I don't remember, he's a strong man from Germany, he holds world records. You have a guy like Nate Diaz, who I don't know if he's vegan again or not vegan again, but at the time he was vegan at the first Conor McGregor. So you have high-level athlete. It's really unrelated. In terms of body mass, yes, it's easier to put on body mass if you're eating animal protein. In terms of, strength as far as 1 rep max, I don't know. I mean, most high-level power lifters probably aren't vegan, so there's not really a wide sample to really say whether or not is it because of the meat or is it because of maybe all the steroids. I don't really know, how much is. But what I do know is it's a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding, and I know for sure from my own. The only thing I can say that I know is what I do, is what I've tested and what I've experienced. The rest is just ideas and theories, and you read a good book and that makes sense, so I believe it. Now you read another book 5 years later that says that book was wrong, and now you believe that. So it's always changing.
That's like the Netflix documentaries on veganism, and the next minute everyone's dodging meat, and the next minute, like the World Health Organization coming out and speaking about bacon, or the Harvard study that said that plant-based diets, people were going to live longer. And again, I think, as you say, you've experienced this, you've experienced meat eating, you've experienced veganism, and it's your choice. And I think that's the most important thing. So when we talk to people about nutrition, we have obviously pre-genetic factors that we may have, but we have our epigenetics. And as you say, what's actually influencing our body? Is it the processed meat? Is it the hormones that our meat are actually eating? When you were talking about digestion there, I think John, he's sick of hearing me talk about this. There's 2 things that I give to 99% of my clients that I recommend: digestive enzymes with BT and HCl, and fish oils or maybe some turmeric. And what I noticed there is, if I can give people digesting their food a little bit better, I can reduce their inflammation, their ability to take in those nutrients, their ability to get stronger, fitter, leaner. It just goes through the roof. And to me, it just makes sense, as you said. Like, I'm loving this call, like the holistic approach. It's health. It's not just overload. There's a specific purpose behind it, and that's something I find. Maybe I'll go vegan, but I love meat too much. Maybe I'll try one day.
And it's just, whatever. If someone wants to eat meat, but what I would say in general is you're not going to go wrong by increasing your vegetable intake.
Yeah, never.
Whether that means you eat meat or not, but it should not be that the center of the diet is a big piece of meat, and then maybe if there's any leftover space, I'll have a salad. This is very far removed from, because we got to look, again, the digestion is, you need to have fiber. You need to, so if you're just eating meat and it's just sitting there, if you don't feel, it's like when the Gracies came on the scene, part of the Gracie diet is like, you need to be able to fight. Like, if I eat right now and somebody attacks me, I got to be able to defend myself. Try eating a big steak and potato and feel like you're going to go and run and climb, and it ain't going to happen. You're like, come back in 4 hours, I need to just think.
All the Irish people are lying drunk because they've just eaten everything and just drunk everything. They're like, we're not ready to fight.
Well, potato and vodka, that's carbs, right?
Yes.
Steve, so we noticed you're doing a bit of this stick mobility. It hasn't really hit Ireland yet.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most innovative fitness tools to come out in quite a while in terms of it's very practical. Basically, it's a very flexible. I'm going to grab one actually.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, guys. Gonna be right back with us.
So the best way is to just do it, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically,
We're all gonna see his abs.
we got this flexible. Okay, so I can basically drive it into the ground, and I can use the stick to, all kinds of. I like to hang on it, do different types of shoulder. So there's a lot we can do with it. Even just kind of stretch the side of the body. So it's very strong, but it's also very flexible. So it's more than just a stick, because it's a stick, but it also bends. Yeah. So you have the stability and the mobility.
Can we get access to one of these over here?
Yeah, well, they have a distributor in England. I don't know if it's in London. It's in England. It's stickmobility.co.uk or uk.co, whatever. One of those.
We'll try and access one of these.
Those I highly recommend it. They have like a 6 feet, a 7 foot, and then they have a smaller one which you can use for shoulders. I like the 7 foot. If I was just going to get one, I like the 7 foot because that longer you can get in some of the deeper ranges. But all the ranges are. And they if you go to the stickmobility.com website, they have some instructional videos.
Yeah.
It's a great compliment. A lot of people are lazy about stretching, so it's a really good. You can you don't have to sit on the ground or lay in the ground. You can kind of do most of it on your feet.
Yeah.
And it just gets into the back and gets into the shoulders. Really good. I think you're going to see it growing a lot over the next couple of years. And the guys behind it are very smart. They have physical therapists, and they put a lot of thought into the development and the exercise prescriptions and stuff. So it's I'd say very, very well thought out.
Nice. You like to do a lot of flow movements as well. Would you attribute that down to just moving your body, or would you associate it with you've got like primal moves or animal flow or whatever you want to call it? But is this just your mixture of just moving the body?
Yeah, I mean, coming from an extensive background in martial arts, we have animal forms and things like this. So it's kind of natural for me to start exploring that, especially with the kettlebells. And I like with the kettlebell, they sit so well, on your body. You can sit it here and it kind of stacks really nicely versus with like a barbell or a dumbbell. You kind of have to hold it with your arm. With the kettlebell, the arm connects to the body. So it's almost like you're just adding weight onto the body versus holding it with your arm. And then, doing different types of lunging patterns, side lunging and forward lunging and rear lunging and, stepping, shuffling. And again, like you say, flow, it's just being creative. But I would call it loaded mobility, where you're just moving and you use maybe a light to medium kettlebell just to give a little an extra kick to help you go a little deeper into those postures. And, that wouldn't be something that a beginner would do, but if you know your body and not to bounce and this type of thing to control the movement.
Just on that, what do you think then, obviously, of these big powerlifting guys? I don't want to mention, I'm just assuming like the West Side guys who, not just wearing suits, but need to have weight on the bar to get into a movement. What's your thoughts on those?
As far as they can't get into the movement without the weight?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot with a lot of real serious power lifters in particular. It just seems not real. For me, it doesn't seem practical outside of, they have those movements, which normally going to be 3 movements, right? Just the bench and the deadlift and the squat. I mean, and the strength is certainly commendable in terms of the amount of force that can be produced. The question I would have is, how are you going to apply that in outside, whether it's a sporting event or a self-defense? Is like, where's the mobility? And I don't see the mobility. So I would say having control over your body for me is a more, I don't want to say admirable, but it's something that I think has higher value for most people because that goes with you everywhere. And, you know, the bar and the squat suit, it's not going to go with you everywhere. So,
it's like training for your sport, but as you say, like that person is limited to a career of maybe 10, 15 years. Well, powerlifting may be shorter, but then where is the longevity? What are you going to do? You know, you're going to have a broken hip for the rest of your life and be impaired just for your ability to play that sport. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Donnie Thompson. That Donnie Thompson is so smart because he's a guy that has achieved the very highest level in powerlifting, and yet, you know, what he teaches, it's all about you don't get injured, and you know, here's techniques that you can use to get strong without basically foregoing your future health just for the pursuit. You can kind of have both, you know, by being so. I really watch what he says and pay attention to what he says because he's one of the few guys that coming out of that world that really is more than just about adding more weight. He's doing it in a very intelligent, more sustainable way.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more athletic. I think
yes, they are becoming more athletic now.
I have this sort of view on powerlifters where they got the power belly and stuff like this here. I actually watched I think it was a Russian guy. He just broke a world record there, and he looked almost like a physique competitor. He was lean.
Because they're doing flexibility and other stuff now. So, yeah.
It was a sumo deadlift. He pulled in his hips, just opened up lovely. I think that sort of, they're becoming more and more athletic and more aware of the stuff that you're actually saying.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, I mean, the potential's there, but that also would indicate that he's doing other things beside training for just those 3 lifts.
Yeah, 100%. So just getting back to obviously the workshop that we're going to have with you on the 20th of April.
28th of April,
Saturday.
28th of April.
Give us a little bit of an insight. What are you going to cover, you know, on the day?
It's going to really combine, I guess the theme we're say is loaded mobility. So if we were to break that down, we have the load, which we're going to be using kettlebells primarily for that. We have the mobility, which is movement. That's the body weight. And then we have the bringing of the two together. So there's definitely going to be an importance of understanding what we would call the foundational movements of the kettlebells. That's having a strong basis there. So we have, you know, swing, clean, press, push, press, snatch, squat. Those being the 6 key. And then we have a whole body, what I would call whole body joint mobility or dynamic mobility. So that's, you know, obviously shoulders, hips, knees, ankles, neck, elbows, hands, fingers, you know, having the ability to move all areas of the body. And then ways that we can go deeper into the mobility using the kettlebell as a very convenient load. So that's the theme of it. There's going to be warm up. There's going to be some intense training in terms of interval training with the kettlebell. There's going to be movement training with body weight in terms of your footwork and how you hold your body position. And there's going to be flexibility at the end, which is how and this is a part that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to, is you have to train like an athlete, which at the end of your training, you need to decompress the body, get rid of the tightness, and the end of your training is actually the preparation for your next training. So that cool down is not only to finish the workout we're doing now, but it's also to lead you into the one that you're going to do in the next day or the day after. So that's sort of the, I guess you would say, the overview of the curriculum.
Awesome, Steve. Looking forward to it, mate.
Yeah. So we'll pop a link on here, guys. You can check out Steve's workshop and then ultimately our MMP, our movement and mobility prep on the next day. Thank you for listening, Steve.
Thank you guys
for coming. To get a little bit more information about yourself, Steve, where can people go to see more of yourself?
The best thing is my website is IKFF. So that's .com, IKFF.com. And then the other places I would send is my YouTube channel. So it's YouTube IKFF channel.
Awesome.
And then the third way would just be to check out my Instagram page, because I put a lot of little short clips, which is just Steve Cotter IKFF.
Nice,
Awesome.
nice one. Steve, you're competing in a few weeks' time, yeah?
1 month. Let's see, 25th of February. Yeah, so it's I guess 28 days from now, 29 days. I'm doing snatch, 32 snatch.
Yes.
32 kilogram snatch. Yeah, I feel good. Training's going great. I just kind of was under the weather for about a week, so today's was my first day kind of training again for about six days, and prior to that I was hitting it pretty much every day, either kettlebell or running, and stretching. So I'm pretty happy about I have a period uninterrupted where I just staying home and not traveling and not getting my schedule interrupted too much. So it's nice. It's a nice feeling to be able to do that.
Yeah. So, guys, check out the link. 20th of April, Steve Cotter is going to be here teaching us all about
28. Yeah, April 28.
April 20th. Yeah.
Yep. Right. You said that, but I didn't recognize your accent.
Our movement and mobility prep, where we're going to teach you how to screen people, a mixture of movement patterns and obviously the stuff that we learn and we practice with our students. How to say that, I don't want to use the word practice because I don't like that word, but how we improve people's movement. And I think Steve's going to be a bit of part of that there. So, Steve, again, thank you very much for being
on. Thank you so much, guys.
Steve, I'll see you in March.
Yeah.
Great. Look forward to it.
Okay. Bye.
Cheers, Patrick. Cheers, Michael. Thanks, brother. See you.